So I went shoe shopping the other day, and anyone who knows me well knows that this is a very important thing. Not because I buy lots of shoes, but actually quite the opposite. It's pretty rare that I buy shoes. Though when I do, I'm expecting them to last me for years. You will see me in church wear shoes on maybe 2 or 3 pair rotation here. So when I get a pair, they'd better be good, and they better last. So I went shoe shopping the other day, and I always have to sort of gear myself up for it because there's a lot of pressure on the moment because they've got to be the right shoes. I have made the wrong purchase and not felt good about it. So I did all this research about what I wanted, and I walked into the shoe store, and I had a plan, and I found just the right pair. They were exactly what I wanted. I had saved up for it, and I was ready. So they bring me out the shoes, and they tell me, okay, we don't quite have your size, but they're a half a size too big, and just try them on, see if you like them. And they were perfect. They were just the right style, and they looked amazing on my feet, and I felt great, but they were a 7.5, and I needed a 7. And I explained to the salesperson that this was a problem, because she said, well, you know what, we can just get you another pair, we'll ship them to you, no problem. And I said, no, honey, you don't understand. I walked into this store today to buy some shoes, not to wait for some shoes. I need them now. There is an instant gratification component to my shopping, folks. I need the shoes today. And I mention all this to say that we tend to do the very same thing with God. We will make plans for God. We will plan out, we will save up and be so sure that we have everything we need to get what we want from God. And we'll be that sure that we come with our plan, and maybe we'll even share that in humble supplication, well, supplication anyway. And we'll say, God, please, I'm ready for you. I've been saving up, I'm just right. Can you show up in the way I want and need right now? Jesus was familiar with this practice because he brought it up in this parable that we have, which is often called the parable of the wise and the foolish virgins. Or in other texts, it'll say the wise and the foolish women. I prefer that since I'm not a virgin and many of us are not either. It makes it more relatable to think about this as women. At any rate, so these wise and foolish women were ready. And they were at this banquet, they were at the party before the banquet, awaiting the bridegroom. And in case you don't know how weddings worked in Jesus' time, this is how we understand them. There would be this fantastic party. It's like a barbecue at the bride's house. And all the people would gather around at the bride's house and await the arrival of the bridegroom, who would then take everybody over to his family's house for the wedding to be consummated, however that would happen. So right now, everybody's waiting for the bridegroom to arrive. And in particular, these women were waiting. And it took a while because the bridegroom was running late. So what Jesus talks about here is what comes between the announcement that the bridegroom is coming and the actual arrival at the banquet. And that is an amount of time that took way longer than anyone, it seems, had anticipated, wise or foolish. In fact, while they were waiting, they'd filled up on some good barbecue. Somebody probably got the potato salad right, maybe even the hummus. So they had, had all their fill, and then they fell asleep. They couldn't stay up. They had to get some rest. And notably, Jesus does not condemn them for falling asleep, which is interesting, because often you'll hear people talking about, because it's not unusual for people to say, be ready, you want to be ready for Jesus, he's coming any minute. And so that kind of inspires a lot of people to feel that they have to be in a constant state of watchfulness, constantly looking around, expecting Jesus to be sucking them up into the eschaton right then, like in the Left Behind series. Patrick and I were talking to a friend the other day who was raised to believe something similar. And he said, so there was one day where I was going to pick up my wife and daughter from school, and I couldn't seem to get in touch with them. And I kept calling and calling. Both of them had phones, and nobody answered. And he said, and they're so good, my wife and my daughter. I thought maybe the apocalypse had happened and that they were taken away because I couldn't reach them. And I thought, my Lord, that is this constant sense of watchfulness, that when you can't reach the people who you want, you're worried that they've been taken away by God and that you were not good enough to make it. And so in that sense, what we're hearing from Jesus is that you don't always have to be awake, that you do get a period of rest. And even as God rested on the Sabbath in creating the creation, we too get to rest. We don't have to be constantly alert in that way. So another part of the tradition of preparing for a wedding feast is that while the bridegroom has not yet arrived, usually the reason for it is that he's off negotiating the dowry and the contract. So the finalization of those plans happens before the bride and all the folks go over to the bridegroom's house. Jesus was delayed because he was negotiating that contract, which is interesting and a really interesting place to pause. Why? Why does it take so long for God to show up? Why is there that sense of delay? Why can't we get the shoes right now? Why can't we be at the banquet already? And my guess, as I started to think about it from this perspective, is that the final redemption of the world, because that's what the banquet is, the final redemption of the world takes a minute. And maybe the world's not quite ready for it yet. Maybe there are some things that need to happen. Maybe God still has more work to do before redemption comes. And maybe we do too. Not that we can earn it, but maybe we're just not quite ready yet. So, the virgins or the women were all waiting, and they're preparing for the banquet, and they know it's coming. And then finally, someone wakes them up out of their sleep. Up, get ready. He's coming. And then, here's what happens. They need to take that journey, but now it's midnight. And so everybody realizes, because remember, there are no street lights in Jesus' time. In order to walk from one person's house to another, you need a lamp. So everybody gets their lamps, and they even prepare them by trimming them so that they're ready to not overburn. But some people in their haste, they start running. They're like, here we go, we're ready. We're going to go to the banquet. And they don't remember to get their oil. Half of the folks did that, and the other half said, wait a minute, and they went and grabbed a flask of oil, and they had, as it turns out, all they needed. So they set out on the journey, and it's dark on that road, and they think they know how far it is to the bridegroom's house, but they don't. And so the people who were expecting it to be immediate, left behind, turns out they didn't have enough oil. And as their lamps start to go out, they say, hey, sis, can I borrow some of yours? And sis knows that she doesn't have oil to share, that she needs the oil she has, that it can't come from her. So she says, I'm sorry, I can't help you. This is Jesus telling this story. And so the people start to panic because they see that the lamps are about to go out, and it's midnight. So where do they head but to the 24-hour bodega? And they had some money in their pockets. So they go and they run away from the whole group, right? And here they are trying to fill up their oil. And they get something, and they head back to the procession. And they're like, here we are again with our oil. And as they get to the gate, things don't quite work out as they had planned. Because the host says, I don't know you. You should have had your oil in the first place. Now, this is what people could think is a little bit of a harsh word from Jesus. So I want to unpack it for us a little bit. Was Jesus saying that these women were left behind now at the gate to the banquet because they didn't bring enough oil? I don't think so. My thought is the problem wasn't so much that they didn't bring the oil with them, it's that they went to the wrong source to fill up. So here's the thing. You might turn to your brother or your sister and ask, can I have some of your faith? Can you give me some patience? I'm out here on the street, I'm running on empty, brother, friend. I need some help. Can you give me what you've got? Can I have a portion of your strength so that I can walk this journey? They went to the wrong source. They thought they could buy it. They thought that they had enough money in their pocket to purchase their blessing. And that isn't, folks, how blessings work. They went to the wrong source. You can't get your faith from the pusher on the corner. You can't purchase it from anyone. You can't borrow it from a friend. You can't take it from that person who seems real strong right next to you, because they're probably just barely holding on sometimes too. What Jesus was saying is that the people who didn't have what they needed for the journey went to the wrong source. They needed to go to God. And we do this all the time. We think that we can pre-order our ticket to the banquet. Like there's Ticketmaster and an app that we can use on our phone. God is not Seamless Web or Grubhub. God is not Amazon Prime or Prime Now. God doesn't just make this delivery for us to figure it out as we purchase our way to God's blessing. God operates completely differently. And so, as we consider these journeys, what we need to know is that we need our lamps lit. We need to be able to see. The people were walking on the road and it was so dark. And again, as these nights of growing darkness come, this is precisely what Advent is putting us towards. As night draws longer, we need more oil. We need more light. We need more faith. And that faith can't come from anyone but God. Now, what does that light show us? Once upon a time, there was a pastor named John Robinson. Anyone heard of him? He was an English pastor, a parson, who was the pastor to the folks who would then head out on the Mayflower. And while they were going to head across to this so-called New World, which was a new world for them and clearly not for many others, right? We remember that this week, don't we? Right. So here they were heading out on the Mayflower, and this pastor, who was not going to be able to journey with them, decided to preach a word, and it was a beautiful sermon. Beautiful, beautiful sermon. And he says, I believe it was in 1540, and he says, folks, listen, I paraphrase. There is still yet more light and truth to break forth from God's holy word. There is still yet more light and truth to break forth from God's holy word. He sends them off on a journey, much like that journey in the darkness of night, where they desperately need the light. They have no clue what they're going to encounter as they cross those seas and come to a new land. And so he's saying to turn to God so that God can keep their lights lit. Did they? Surely some must have, but as I borrow words from the great late Malcolm X, perhaps they landed on Pilgrim Rock, but Pilgrim Rock, when they landed on the people who were already there. They did not come with the light and the love of God. They didn't show up with compassion. What they did was they took. And they were so sure that they knew God, that they knew everything they needed to know, that they were the sources of their own light, that for the people who they considered savage, They didn't have to treat them as human. And if they were to treat them as human, it's as if they would have to convert to their lightness in order to not be brutalized and murdered. When we're looking at others for the sake of our own gain, we are not holding Christ's light. When we're so sure that we know everything we need to know, we head off on a journey without sufficient oil. And that is what we do all of the time. That's how we become Plymouth Rock landing on someone. And God doesn't stand for it. Instead, what Jesus says about that long, dark journey in a night which you cannot see, where your foot is going before you except by the light of God. You need the light because you have to be able to look around and see God. Because if you think that God is only waiting at the edge of the journey, that you have to get to the banquet to meet God, then you're going to be missing all of the good that God is doing in the people's lives around you. You don't have all the light, folks. I don't either. And what if the folks on the Mayflower had come over and said, wow, we can't wait to acknowledge the light in these people we'll encounter? What if they had received the folks who received them's hospitality with a sense of gratitude that acknowledged that God already knew them and was active in their lives, and that they didn't have to brutalize or destroy in order to bring more of God's light? What if they knew that God was the source of the light and not their own knowledge? And what Jesus is saying is not, and because remember, who are the ones who had enough oil? It was the wise ones. Sometimes you can hear a bit of an attack on wisdom and knowledge in Christianist circles. These are the kinds of folks who don't like learning, who would, for example, tax a teacher for trying to buy school supplies for their students, which is what shows up in this latest tax bill, by the way. These are the folks who don't like learning and knowledge, who would tax those of us who have student loans and interest to pay. Who has student loan interest to pay this year, right? So this new bill is going to say, hey, knowledge, we don't value that enough to give you a little bit of a break in the taxes you need to pay. Let's attack the educational system. That's what it's doing, while pivoting to allow the places that will turn people away. So, okay, here we go. You could actually invest in education and allow the places that will take everyone, like, for example, public schools, to thrive with the resources they need. Or you can drain the public schools, take away people's access to higher education through loans and such, and grants, which they also drain, and then only give money to the places that will turn people down, like private schools and parochial schools. This attack, Christianists, because it's coming from many so-called Christians, Christianists' attack on education comes from this misinterpretation of Scripture that teaches that there's a problem with wisdom and learning and questioning and wondering and looking to other places for light than just our own light. And what I love and adore about Jesus, as I mentioned last week, is that he knows better and he can anticipate it. And he says, in fact, wisdom, to be wise, is not wrong. In fact, it's to be open to all that I'm saying so that you can look around and know that I am active, that you can walk the path of this long, dark journey and know that there is light around you from the others who will carry that light, and that you don't have it all and you were never the source of it in the first place. And here's my mic. So Jesus anticipates the kinds of problems that the faithful will have as they are sure that they know the way. Pretty smooth, huh? I can do it. Maybe I'm a pro. But I don't have all that light. I don't have all that wisdom. I don't have all that learning, and nobody can. It's that sense of humility that says that God's blessings surround us all the time, that open our eyes to all that God has been and will be doing, that makes us ready to hear God's word, and then ready to follow it. And so people, be ready. Be ready to be open to God. Be ready to listen for God. Be ready to be wrong. We are wrong all of the time. Me too. I hate it, but it's true. We don't always get it right. And God's anticipating that. We will stumble. And there's a reason that we head out on this journey with others, right? Because we will fall. And someone will see us down on that road, and with the light that they have to offer that strength, they will offer us that hand. And sometimes your neighbor will fall, and they will need everything from you that you have to give, and you can give it. You can't give them the faith, but you can give them your compassion and your love. We don't set out on this journey alone. We have each other, and most importantly, we have God. To be ready is to know that the oil comes from God and that your cup overfloweth. We talked about this last week, that we can't necessarily feel the blessings of God until we realize that God has given us all that we need. The oil that they needed back from the house, it was there. They didn't have to ask anyone for it. It was already there. And what we need, the faith that God intends for us to feel, is already here. It's already within us. We just have to remember the source from which it comes. Are you ready to be ready, folks? Then thanks be to God. Amen.